Hi, hello. Good morning there, good evening, depending where you are. My name is Silvana Fumega, and I'm the project director of the Global Data Barometer. That is a multi-dimensional index that assesses countries around the world focused on data for the public good and providing much needed insight into where and how data is being used to advance development. But we'll go into that later in this session. To start this conversation first, I'd like to acknowledge the work and effort from the organizers to make this conversation possible. I know it's been complex logistics and work, so I'm really grateful for that. I'm also grateful for the speakers that are there in person, and also the speakers that are online and they are connected at this time of the evening for them to be part of this discussion. Today, we are gathered here to talk about tools to measure progress on the development goals and the Agenda 2030. In this sense, the need to assess the role of data in advancing towards the goals could not be clearer. In this sense, we need, sorry, are you, okay, sorry. Um, so In this context, we need to take a closer look at the latest evidence on where countries stand regarding progress to date, as well as highlight trends and opportunities for improvement. And to do so, we need tools to measure the progress on a comparative global scale. So to talk about this need and some of the tools, we are dividing this conversation into two parts. During the first part, Shaira Beatty, the executive director of the Open Data Watch, will be introducing the topic and also moderating a conversation between Francesca Perruti, chief of the Development Data and Outreach branch of the United Nations Statistics Division, and Fernando Perini, Senior Program Specialist from International Development Research Center. After that initial conversation, we're going to move into the second session that is going to be a presentation from some of the key partners in the development of the Global Data Barometer. So, and hopefully, if we have some time, we're going to get a few questions from the audience there and also the public online. So, just not to take more time, I don't know, Shaira, if you are there to start the conversation with Fernando and Francesca.
I hope you can hear me. Yes, I can
Oh,
hear
yes,
myself.
perfect.
So, hi, Silvana. Good morning. Very good morning. Very early morning to you. You're coming in from Buenos Aires, right?
Yes, so it's late at
Okay.
night, to be
Oh.
more precise.
Well, thank you for the
Thank
introduction
you.
and really exciting session. So we're going to be focusing on looking at sort of the capacity of the countries in how we are doing in terms of this amazing and the challenging data agenda that we have for ahead of us. I mean, data agenda of the 2030, but the data agenda of the countries broadly for meeting their national needs. And as Silvana said, we're dividing up the conversation into two parts. In the first 15 minutes, I will have a conversation with two very important people on understanding a little bit more on where we stand internationally on the capacity of the countries for actually meeting the SDG agenda, and not only in terms of monitoring, but in terms of implementation and actions. And then in the second part of the conversation, we move to Silvana, who is going to be moderating, more focused on the community that has come together for working on the Global Data Barometer. And I wanted to also stress what Silvana said, that it's very important for these measurement systems to keep developing for us to gain understanding of where countries are. There are a number of efforts, number of organizations that are working on these measures. And one of them is, of course, my group, the Open Data Watch, where we look at the openness and data availability of countries. The World Bank has the statistical performance indicators. Many organizations like IMF look at very specific areas that they are progressing. There's a lot of work now going on sectoral performance and see how different sectors are performing. So there's a lot of good attention on building capacity and where countries are. And also many of these indicators and many of these indices are being used for investment decisions. So we see them often in the, for example, World Bank investment documents as where countries stand and where they want countries to be. Many countries use them for their own monitoring system. Some of you are in the audience. I've seen you big users of these indicators. So we have a very interesting discussions ahead, both understanding what the demand is, what the ecosystem is from Francesco and from Fernando, but also a response from Silvana on how GDB, the Global Data Barometer, is meeting those demands. So from further ado, let me just again introduce Francesca Perucci. Everybody knows her, the Chief Development Data and Outreach branch of the UN Statistical Division, and she's the mother of the World Data Forum and been there from the beginning. And then also we have Fernando Perini, who's the Senior Program Specialist at IDRC. And if I could request that the Fernando would be, hi, Fernando. Wow, that's a big picture of you. And really good to see you here, and standing to your next big picture is very interesting. So I'm going to start with Francesca, and then I move to Fernando. Francesca, if I can bring you to the podium, the question while you're walking to the podium, the question that I have for you is, what do you think is the most important enabling factor to ensure we have the right data to measure progress on the SDGs? I know this is a topic that we can wake you up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you answer. So please come to the podium and talk to us.
Thank you so much, Sheda. Good morning and hello everyone who are those listeners from all over the world. I feel a bit intimidated standing behind this big Fernando. Hi, Fernando. Nice to see you.
Very nice to see you.
Very nice to see you. So this is the big question, right, Sheda? Where do I start? Perhaps the first thing I want to mention is how do we make this happen, right? Having the data we need is that really we need to start thinking of data as a key central asset, right? With the real strong political commitment behind, which of course also brings the right resources. So not just looking at the indicators that we need to monitor, but really looking at data as an enabler of development and change in society and addressing the needs of all. But we also need to strengthen the capacity in all these different parts of the data ecosystem that we've been talking over the last couple of days, right? We've seen initiatives from so many parts of the system, but all of those different parts still need to have the right tools, the right resources from line ministries, civil society organizations, even private sector, understanding and learning how to engage with the public part, with the public side of the data production. So we need to really include those capacity efforts in all different parts of the system, not just to produce the data, but also to use the data. And we know, it's hard to measure the impact of data on the policy making. Are really data producing better policies? So that's a very important discussion, and we need to work really on that point. But this applies to all data. But when it comes to the SDGs, I think we have very specific challenges. So when the SDGs were launched in 2015, clearly, the horizons were all of a sudden were much broader than what we are used to deal with the MDGs, with the Millennium Development Goals. All of a sudden, we were covering and we were asked to address so many new topics and areas that were not at all part of the regular data production system. So, and not only that, we were also asked to look at the interlinkages across the targets and goals. So very complex framework that required so many new parts of the data ecosystem to come together and understand how to produce those data, how to frame them, how to then come up with appropriate indicators that would allow us to measure progress. And the other big challenge, of course, is related to the principle of leaving no one behind. So having the granularity and the timeliness to be able to address and cover all population groups. So what is needed for that is another big enabling factor, which is having the right infrastructures. We heard this morning during the plenary, how important it also is to look at the foundational data systems. So foundational data systems on which you build and you integrate the new data sources that allow you to expand that wealth of data, the range of topics that you need to cover. So important, IT infrastructures, everything has to be put in place so that you can build and bring in all these different parts of the system. But then, of course, once you do that, you expand your data ecosystem to such a high degree that you need very strong and well-developed governance system. And you need as data steward. You need some way of bringing all these different parts together in a way that you still ensure adherence to the principles, quality, ensuring that you still protect confidentiality, data rights, so the citizens see their needs and the issues that they care about, they recognize those in the data, but at the same time they still feel they own the data that they've been shared with private sector entities, with the regular data programs. We heard yesterday, I think, someone asking, yeah, who owns the data, right, in the end? And why some private sector, they're profiting from that, citizens still feel like that conflicts, right? Do they share the data or not? So, and all that becomes part of this overall discussion on data governance that we need to develop and have, a clear system on how we can work together and guarantee all that. And then finally, we need frameworks, norms and standards that can be used by everyone so that we all sort of work with the same approaches and we can integrate, share, aggregate. To monitor progress, you need to aggregate and to compare. And finally, I would say we need financing and political commitment. That's what I said in the beginning, but I think that's what I want to conclude these few points with. We need international cooperation, we need domestic resources being mobilized, and we need those funds to be used the best way we can, working together and not allowing fragmentation across communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Francesca. Those are great pointers for us from the global perspective that you have, from capacity in all directions going to financing and political engagement. And I think our GDB, Global Data Barometer colleagues are very happy hearing this, because many of those elements are being captured, in fact, in measuring the Global Data Barometer. So let me come to you, dear Fernando, with a question on how can the broader data for development community collaborate to facilitate better development outcome? In that regard, what has your organization, IDRC, has supported? Why has it supported GDB? Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Shana. Thanks, the GDB team to organize the session. Thanks to the World Data Forum and Francesca, particularly to to join the session. It's really great points that you just made, and I'm talking to you from here from Canada. Um, and I work for the International Development Research Center, which is a crown corporation here in Canada that supports research, supports, it's part of International Aid of Canada, and particularly our commitment for the more than 10 years have been to support build capacity of researchers in the global south to use data for development. I been involved in a program for many years on open data for development, in particularly where I was coordinating that, and we are creating many actions to really build that community to think through the issues, some of the issues that Francesca just mentioned, and we have had, and from our perspective, the issues of open data and the broader data for development ecosystem needed to be brought together in a more coherent way. Think about all the issues on data governance, rights, civil engagement, the role of government, who produces, private sector, and so on. They needed to be bring together, and I think that the UN World Data Forum is a key forum for us to really bring these communities together to think about the next steps. Uh, I would say a few things. I would say five to try to be very, very precise here, and how I think the GDB, particularly Global Data Barometer, is important to reflect in the is a microcosmos of what we need to do to make the community at the global level collaborate and advance in terms of achieving not just measuring what's happening around the world, but actually really leveraging data to achieve the SDGs by 2030 and beyond, right? And in specific areas. I think that there is the first element that I think is super important is the issue of understanding what are the really the best practice on use of data to advance in specific issues, for political integrity to climate change to health issues and so on. We really need to understand what are the good practices on the different areas. And I think that the GDB have been working with many thematic partners around the world that really knows the best, some of the kind of to think about the questions, what systematize that learning into specific questions that are incorporated to GDB. And I think that this is important and comes from a long tradition of research in this area. The second point, I think, is to build local knowledge and local understanding, and the GDB does that by kind of really supporting local researchers to collect the data at the local level and understanding like what's the context, the data, every country, every situation, the context matters a lot on how we do that, how advanced. And I think building that local knowledge is fundamental to really uh, understand, move to change. And I think that the third point that the GDP does really well, and I think that's super important for the community overall, is learn from each other. In the case of the GDB, we compare the data from across like that's collected across the different countries and so on, and try to systematize and compare and understand that the good practices come from everywhere. There are things that are super. There's not just one advanced country that has all the best solutions for anything. It's actually everybody has something that they have done that they innovated, and I think this collaboration and this learning is super important. The fourth thing that I think is really once you systematize, once you learn, and once you know what is the best practice, and you compare, and you have the data, you need to put that into action. You need to support the people that are doing the reformers in government, people from civil society that are advocating for the change, and really make the kind of the advance those provide that evidence and make that evidence support the change. And I think the fifth one, the last one, is really to start all over again, because then you need to measure again, understand how you're making progress, how you can understand take learning from that and incorporate again into the cycle of learning that goes. And I think that inside the the broader community, and I think the GDB really provides a good tool to kind of take stock of what is happening in the community and advance some of these goals. And as IDRC, we are proud and happy to have supported the first edition of GDB, and we are already thinking about the next one and what are the things that we need to incorporate, what the things that we need to think together, what are the things that we need to connect with the other tools that are also measuring the use of data, the governance of data, and so on, and how we can connect that together. We are doing that together also with the Open Data Watch, and I think that creating a community of learning between these tools that are measuring data for development, I think is super important as well. So I stopped there, Shaida, but looking forward for the conversation, and I'm really excited. And I apologize I couldn't be in China with you, but I know that we are very well represented with you there, and I'm looking forward to hear more about all the outcomes and ideas that you're bringing from that.
Thank you. Thanks, Fernando. We'll definitely report back. I've been appointed as one of the UN World Data Forum ambassadors, where Francesca called for today. We need you back to become an ambassador too. I want to also recognize Fernando's role, that an important role that IDRC has played in sort of advocating and also setting a pattern and an agenda for open data, and now moving from open data to data use and global data barometer. So this has been really great. We heard from Francesca this enabling environment that we need at the international level for the data agenda, and also we've heard from Fernando some of the motivations and some of the aspirations that we have for the measurement and for monitoring and implementing that agenda through the efforts such as the Global Data Barometer. Now we're going to move to the second section of this exciting session, and I give it back to Silvana, who's going to go with the conversation with really important figures in the GDP and tell us more about how it all comes together. Silvana, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaira. I was taking notes of all the conversation because I think there were like really important points that Francesca and Fernando were making about these tools. So hopefully we can think about all these points later in this session or in another session. Just to take advantage of the time, we will quickly move now to the experience of a group of international expert organizations in the development of the Global Data Barometer. But just a few comments before moving to our online guests. I'd like to add that the SDGs were foundational to the Global Data Barometer. At the GDB, we are looking at how data is being used as a tool to address the challenges that SDGs set. That is, the barometer provides evidence, or at least it aims to provide evidence on how data is being used to meet many of the uh, 17 goals. So just to give you one example that is coming to my mind that is related, for example, to the right to information performance. In that sense, it could help us to assess the progress on the indicator 16.10.2, together with, of course, other information like the annual service coming from UNESCO and the RTR rating. So this is just one small example that can help us to assess different type of goals and challenges that SDG can set. So one other thing that I would like to add is that many indicators can be cross-referenced with SDG, and also that I have to say that they have strongly influenced the selection of themes. So just to think about the themes, we are now going to the organizations that together with other organizations that are not here today, but they were key parts of the development of the first edition. We are going to have a small conversation about their role in the development and the things that they are bringing to the table. So I'm going to introduce each of the panelists. They're going to have 5 minutes each to share their experience and the reasons behind the need of having this kind of tools like the GDB and other assessment tools. And later, we're going to try to see if we have some time for questions. So our guests today are Joseph Foti, the Chief Research Officer from the Open Government Partnership, Laura Megiolaro, the Executive Director for Land Portal, Aura Martinez Oriol, the Technical Knowledge and Cooperation Coordination from the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, and George Neumann, the Head of Communication of Open Contracting Partnership. So just to make it easier, we are gonna start in that order. So Joe, if you are there, maybe we can start with you. OGP has been the thematic organization that together with Transparency International was key in the development of the public integrity module that is the largest one in our server. So we want to know from Joe, if you are there, if you can share with us some of the main trends in terms of the data on public integrity and how is the GDB helping you in advancing the work. Joe, if you're there, the
Yep,
floor is yours.
I'm here. Can you hear me and see me? Great.
Perfect.
So
I'm Joe Foti. I'm from the Open Government Partnership. Thank you to everyone who arranged this and those of you who are attending today. If you don't know OGP, just real quickly, it's 76 national governments and um, now I believe 150 or nearing 150 local governments who work on improving access to information, civic participation, and public accountability. Of course, of relevance to everything that you're working on at this conference is, of course, it's a special attention to implementing SDG 16. So how did we use the Global Data Barometer, and why should you use it? So for us, we're not as interested in a ranking or an aggregate score, but we have a large membership of, as I said, nations, municipalities, provinces, and they're interested in very much solving their problems of uh, the quality of democracy and reining in corruption in this case. And in particular, people gave us the input that they wanted to know more about political corruption. And so specifically, to put that in simplest terms, I think that's how are decision makers chosen and how do those decision makers make choices in policy. But it's not enough for us to just know what the law is or for us to know some aggregate score. Those are very good. They're very helpful, and there are many great indexes on average does a government take into account its citizens' viewpoints. What we wanted to know here was something much more specific, and this is where the GDB is so helpful, is we wanted to understand very concretely what the policies are that are in place, and not only that, whether they're implemented and whether people can access the data that's important. And so, with regard to how decision makers are chosen, we wanted to look at, do they declare their assets upon entering office and leaving office? Do they have unexplained wealth? We wanted to understand who is financing them. Are they spending that money legally? These are some of the important questions that we had there. How do they make choices in policy? We wanted to understand when it comes to legislation, who's lobbying, who's visiting with these politicians. We wanted to understand uh, who is informing public comments on regulation, and finally, when there are decisions and discussions, what do we know about the implementation of the right to information law, which most UN members now have? And so the amazing thing about the Global Data Barometer for us is that it gives really concrete advice. So when a government says, oh yeah, I already have an access to information law, we can say, well, do you have agency by agency data? And does that data tell you how many denials of requests were made? And does it tell you why those denials were made? And did it tell you how many of those were overturned on appeals? That helps a government understand, okay, we want to implement SDG 16, point 3, I believe, but very concretely, we need to improve how many agencies are getting overturned on appeals. That's a real problem. So the Global Data Barometer has two very particular firsts, which I don't know any other set of data that has something equally as good as hidden in it. And what's an amazing thing is it has open data on lobbying, which there's no global database on lobbying. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the only one. And the second one is right to information implementation, which again is really key. And as far as I know, there's a lot of great indexes on right to information in particular sectors or in or the law, but again, not on the actual implementation monitoring of administrative data. So what did we find when we looked at this? Well, the most important thing, of course, is at the country level. But at an aggregate level, we found a few things that were problems. Number one, we found that to some extent, basic collection of data was a problem. And this was especially true when it came to lobbying data. But we found publication of data actually to be a bigger barrier, which was interesting. And that in particular is the case where quite often the law does not require publication. So with politicians' assets, for example. Finally, when
With high value data, we also found that often the most important data is missing. For example, if lobbyists are meeting with lawmakers, what day did they meet them on? You need to know the date. You need to know what the topic was on, for example. So that high value data is essential. And then, of course, as my colleagues will point out, there's problems with the usability of the data. If it's spread out across hundreds of websites, that is, of course, a problem. And I'm at time, but I'm happy to answer any more questions. We're using this, of course, in our discussions with governments, and we've seen just a record number of governments dealing with issues like lobbying since the spotlight has been brought to the issue. So thank you all for your work, and I'm happy to engage on this topic.
Oh, there. Thank you, Joe. I think we were using or were thinking when thinking about this session about the same example about RTI performance. I think it's a key part of the public integrity module, and I invite everybody to check it. And also, I invite everybody to check, if you haven't seen it, the Open Government Partnership has done a really great report, Broken Links, using the data coming from the barometer. So if you haven't seen it, please go to the Open Government Partnership website and check that report. So now I want to move to the land module. I mean, it was developed with a great uh, help of the land portal. So now I'd like to hear from Laura, the executive director, if you want to share with us some of the main trends and some of the things that you were finding there and some of the things that you are looking for in the future. So Laura, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Silvana. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, the land portal is a leading advocate for open land data. So, in the sector, it's like the mosquito in the air, no? That's everybody listens to it continuously when it comes to improving access to land information for government providers or any other intermediaries and continuously talk about making data more open, more accessible. So why the SDGs is important for the land sector? So there are more than a dozen land-related indicators house over 5 SDGs goals. So with data maintained by different custodian agencies. There are many national, regional, and global organizations and stakeholders working in the sector that are committed to implementing the SDGs and monitoring land-related indicators to improve responsible land governance and secure tenure rights for all. But land is a cross-cutting, multidimensional issue. So this complexity is also reflected in the land-related SDGs indicators, which have very heterogeneous backgrounds linking to other cross-cutting issues such as gender or the effect of climate change, such as land degradation, urbanization, informal settlements is also key, or forest to tenure, which is key for indigenous people, security of tenure, or agricultural investments. So all these aspects are kind of captured by different indicators dispersed across different goals. So for this reason, data related to land issues highly scattered across many websites, databases of different agencies, governments, statistical agencies, sometimes making it difficult to get a clear picture. So, in spite of these, there's been a great effort into the collection of data related to the SDGs, both by the official national statistical offices and custodians, but also by a big group of civil, national and global civil society organizations and intermediaries that contributes to this official process and support it. So all these, of course, come with the recognition that land information is a core element in achieving sustainable development in any jurisdiction. But despite this growing attention that has been fueled by the SDGs momentum, most land data remain fragmented, incomplete, scarce, and closed, inaccessible, so difficult to monitor. So what is the state of open land data? When it was published in 2019, the State of Open Land Data chapter concludes that when it comes to data land tenure, land use, or land transactions, we often face a situation of lack of transparency, patchy, overlapping, and chaotic data sets and systems. So despite investments in land monitoring by donors, government or the private sector, very, very little data is openly available. And in such a politically sensitive uh, environment, so land is very political, very contested, controversial. Data collection and publication must also take this into account and consider the power dynamics in land governance, which often are reflected in the data governance as well. So the situation is not surprising if we recognize that land data is different from any other data type. So land data, especially tenure data, often are stored in outdated pre-digital information systems, reflecting patterns that have evolved over many centuries, with overlapping tenure systems, in some countries still including feudal structures or traditional rights or customary rights, leasehold and freehold altogether overlapping, creating conflict many times. And the first registries were developed under colonial administrations, and in many countries still lack a centralized registry, let alone digital records. Very few countries have digital records. What does it mean? This means that land data in particular is costly, very expensive to produce and to maintain. So why the GDB is important for us? The land port has been a partner in the Global Data Barometer since the very beginning. Again, the mosquito in the air. No, I'd say land is very important, and measuring land data openness is super important. So the good news is this relationship, between the open data community and the land community has developed over years and continue to grow and to strengthen. The strengthening of this relationship recognizes the need for a mutually beneficial relationship that enables work across sectors, recognizing not that only joining forces we can drive change, and make progress, improving access to data and engaging the government and the data custodian in these conversations. Because again, why do we do that? Our ultimate goal is not just ranking or creating a measuring system, is really have an entry point to work with government, build capacity, and make local these ecosystems more open. So this has led to a fruitful collaboration with the Global Data Barometer in recent years to co-develop the land model, tracking the state of land information and measuring the openness of land data. Compared to the previous Open Data Barometer, which was only looking at national cadastre and registry, the Global Data Barometer has brought a significant improvement in the measurement of data. So as I said, land is cross-cutting, multidimensional. So you have to look at different data types. So looking primarily at tenure and land use data, as well as the use of data policy change or the capacity of government or data governance framework more in general. This has created a much better baseline for monitoring land data around the world. Looking ahead, we would like to continue this collaboration, strengthen this collaboration by further enhancing the land model and better aligning with the work of the land portal on our state land information program and create an index, an indicator that includes other data categories, belongs to the modern land administration theory, such as land value, land development, which together with land use and land tenure would cover the main functions of the land administrations in most countries. So we also want to become better able to measure data management capacity and literacy of government to be able to help them improve their land information systems and whether countries have the right data governance to protect data, the conditions to ensure data equity and the interest of the most disadvantaged and marginalized groups. So they are protected and they are better able to access and use data to secure property rights and seek justice or fight corruption. So with better data, government and donors will be in a better position also to invest in technical infrastructure for land administration and work in partnership with land data. So we're really looking forward to continue and strengthen this collaboration for better data ecosystems for the land sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. And the land module has been really important for all of us to understand how much work is still needed to improve the data that we need in just a key area like land. So I don't want to waste any time because I'm afraid that we are going to be running out of time. So I want to move quickly to Aura Martinez Oriol. She's working with the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency. And then, I mean, we're going to talk with Jörg Neumann from Open Contracting Partnership. So, Aura, if you want to share with us some of the insights that you had from the public finance module that you've been working on and you helped to develop as well.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Silvana, and everyone for organizing this conversation. I just want to mention that the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, for those of you who might not know it, we're a network of 57 governments represented by their ministries of finance directly and subnational governments, as well as civil society organizations that are experts in public finance and some funders in the public financial management scope, such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, amongst others. And we also have some of our stewards here, like Open Contracting, joining, and the Open Government Partnership joining this panel. Our work basically sets on improving and homogenizing standards, not only in data, but also in rules, as well as improving fiscal transparency and public participation within the budget cycle. And very recently, we have started also bringing that transparency, into how the budgets, in public budgets in specific, contribute to the accomplishment of development goals, such as those that can be catalyzed by the SDGs and its indicators. So for many of you might sound like the green budgeting or gender sensitive budgeting. It's very common now. The integrated financial frameworks for the financing of the SDGs as well. So that's something that we are also incorporating in our work. We are part of the International Budget Partnership, where we do have also an index, the Open Budget Index, which focuses in documents. So in the quality of the 8 key budget documents that are published and what's in it according to international standards, as well as the timeliness of its publication. But we saw that there was a lack of collective knowledge that what would give the extra step on thinking about data. So whereas the Open Budget Index is very solid and has a number of years measuring the quality and opportunity of documents, and how they are published to the public so that they can have a timely contribution to the budget cycle, we didn't see that in terms of how to assess the data that was out there. So we contributed with the Global Data Barometer as a partner to develop the public finance module, where we focus on 2 key areas: governance, which evaluates the existence and comprehensiveness of regulatory frameworks that mandate structured information disclosure requirements in specific for public financial management information. That is, for example, the executive's budget proposal, the reports that are produced during the year, and especially also the budget execution. And the second element would be availability, which really evaluates the level of openness and public access to structured, machine-readable information on similar topics such as the budget proposal, amendments, spending in general, but also touching very key points such as extra budgetary funds, the spending of state-owned enterprises or public corporations, as well as whether there is cross-cutting themes on SDG tagging within the budgets. And I mean, I want to invite you very kindly to check that module. We also have a publication on how to use it, the main results that's on the Global Data Barometer stories section, but also have published a guide on how to specifically use this module and how to get specific data points from it so that you can you are not alone while exploring this information, as it could be a bit dry sometimes to talk about budgets. Nonetheless, we think it's very important. And we were pleasantly surprised, but the surprise that we found that public finance data sets are amongst some of the most available worldwide and most available due to the government's actions. So this was very, and we were closely by public procurements. I'm sure Open Contracting representative will talk about this a bit more. So while this is the case as per the Global Data Barometer evaluation, what we see is that this, as a great challenge coming out of this realization, is that this data is not well communicated. And it's also probably because there's not enough opportunities to engage with it or to participate in an impactful way, that it's not as commonly known. Because people, if you ask most people, I'm sure even some of yourselves, whether your country is very transparent on how they are spending, many of you might say no. And you might be surprised on the information that you find that it's published and even in open data. Another key factor, key knowledge point that we found, that we have not found ever in the literature so far before engaging with the Global Data Barometer, is which countries have data disaggregated by cross-cutting issues. That means, for example, climate action, gender budgeting, youth and child budgeting, or sensitive budgeting, or any number of vulnerable groups that could be tagged directly in the budget, so that their allocations or the public policies that have allocations to that policy would be identifiable, including SDGs as a general framework, but also going, as I mentioned, through some of the topics included in the SDGs. And we found that only 22 countries publish under some degree disaggregated data by cross-cutting programs. This is out of over 100. And really, those that would say that are more closer to actually being published, because we have the option of setting partially, no, partially, and yes, are actually just really 11. So it's very, we there see a very important trend where public budgets have a great opportunity to be more identifiable on the way that they are contributing to SDGs and development goals, even if not framed as SDGs, but rather the generic topics such as climate change, gender, etc. So I think that's also a key learning coming from the Global Data Barometer, as many that I invite you to explore in the public financial module. And being mindful of the time, I'm going to leave it here. Of course, open to questions, and just at any point, follow us at Fiscal Trans, and we will also answer questions through that media. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aura. And please, if you want to work with data, in particular public finance, go and check the guide that they had developed, because it's really practical and useful. So go to the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency website to check that resource. That is really useful. And as Aura mentioned, I mean, her and also our speaker now, Georg Neumann from the Open Contracting Partnership, they both represent areas like, for example, budget and spending data, as well as public procurement data, where there are relatively high levels of structure and open data publication. And we think that suggests a positive influence of global campaigns and capacity building initiatives in promoting data publication and use. And in that sense, the work of GIFT and the work of the Open Contracting Partnership is helping these areas to have like better data and more data each day. So George, if you want to add your insights to this, I mean, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Silvana, and good morning. I'm Gerd Neumann. I work for the Open Contracting Partnership, a nonprofit that works in over 50 countries across all continents. And we help partners governments, civil society organizations, multilateral development banks think differently about public procurement using an open government and an open data approach to drive impactful reforms, really questioning why do you need data? How are you going to use that data and what for what purpose? So I like the fact that this session is really under the question of like achieving sustainable development goals. Public contracts really matter. They're government's number one corruption risks, fueled by money, power, and opacity. And thanks to the Global Data Barometer, we know that while some data on public procurement is available for most of the 109 countries, together with budget data, only 9 really publish data for the full public procurement process, from planning to implementation, using stifling basically the use and effective oversight. Because where, from a infrastructure, if you look at infrastructure, for example, where a lot of the corruption happens is in the implementation, like are the schools being built, what's the quality of the streets? So really having that information is critical to effectively provide oversight. At the Open Contracting Partnership, we steward an open data standard, the Open Contracting Data Standard, that helps improve publishing procurement data. So we help through this standard guide governments in telling them, if you want to achieve those goals, here's the information that you should publish. And you can check out that data at our data registry from over 50 publishers at open-contracting.org. So as I mentioned, public procurement can be a strategic tool to implement public policies and manage public finances. So how can we use these $13 trillion to deliver on sustainable development goals? And that's why we're increasingly focusing on the value of connection, linking public procurement data with non-procurement data. And the Global Data Barometer is actually a unique tool that really helps identify opportunities where procurement data is available and land data is available, health data might be available, education data is available. So one of the innovations in last year's edition that we thought was really insightful was a focus and an effort to look at the ecosystem of data use, of people using the information. And we found for public procurement that there were organizations looking at red flags to detect corruption about in a third of the countries. But there were only 2 cases of procurement data being used to support sustainable and environmental questions or improve access to marginalized groups. And I think that highlights an area where we as procurement nerds need to work more with the people who work directly with people on issues such as health and education. But it also highlights, how important procurement data is to actually show where money is being spent. I want to give you, to inspire you maybe a little bit, 3 examples for this kind of data use that we thought is very insightful in how data is being used to achieve those goals. So the first example looks at climate change and building more resilient communities. In India, our partners at Civic Data Lab used an intelligent data model to help decision makers influence and improve flood procurement, so that the most vulnerable communities actually in Assam, India, actually are better protected from the worst of the floods. So the model goes in detail and joins up and analyzes data on climate data, on weather, on socioeconomic and demographic indicators, and as well as government spending and contracts. And they found some clear indicators that some of the most vulnerable communities actually didn't receive enough funding to rebuild infrastructure. So this model is now being adopted by the Assam government to reprioritize those investments going further. So this is a really good example for linking 2 very different data sets. And a second point really highlights one of the gaps that we see in a lot of the data, which looks at increasing inclusion, such as women businesses. So there's a pronounced gender gap for women businesses in public contracts. On average, only a little more than 30% of contracts go to women-led businesses in Chile, Colombia, or Ecuador. And at the same time, in value, it's only about a fifth. But probably even more challenging really here is that the lack of data to adequately track and calculate that information. There are good efforts in just tagging whether the procurement, the company that receives the contract, is a women-owned business. But that is not the rule, it's the exception. So if we want to be serious about addressing the issue of gender in development, we need to start measuring it, and the Global Data Barometer is a great tool for that. A third example is comes from Paraguay, where students have been using school contract data of partners at Reacción in Paraguay to combine education budgets with public contracts and school facilities that are being purchased actually are being built and where they land up. And they found that monitoring, and I think again that's the critical point of linking data with data users and making sure that the information is being used to monitor concrete issues. Thanks to that work, 80% of the schools most in need now receive funding compared to 20% in 2015. Final consideration, it's not only about the data, data lives in that environment. It's like having an amazing guitar and never playing it. The examples that I highlighted, improving climate resilience, increasing inclusion, fighting corruption, are only possible when the data is open. And I think that's something that we shouldn't mention too little. And users, internal and external, can actually engage around it. So every government has a database of public procurement data, but too often the information is not publicly available for others to engage, use, and propose solutions to some of the most pressing problems we're facing. So the Global Data Barometer shows you what works and where that can work and where we have to do more. The value of data lies in how it can be used when it's analyzed and used for decision making. So in that sense, you can't manage what you can't measure. Thank you, Silvana, for organizing this session.
Thank you so much. And as we can see, I mean, even in areas where there's high levels of structured data, there's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of room for improvement. So I just want to briefly address one of the questions that was in the chat from one of the participants that is asking about how is the GDB ongoing maintained. And I have to say that in the website, what you're going to find is the result for the first edition that is covering from 2019 to 2021. And as Fernando was mentioning as well, we are working on the second edition. So far, what you're going to find there is results and report from the first edition. And I know that we need to finish on time. So basically, what I want to do before giving the floor to Shaira is to thank everybody, speakers that were really late at night. Also, participants that were in the chat, that were in the room. Thank you so much. And I want to invite everybody. I put the link in the chat, but if you're not looking into the chat, the website of the Global Data Barometer is globaldatabarometer.org. So there you can find all the information that was mentioned in there. And also please check all the website from the different organizations and the resources they have been produced. And you can check them also in their website. So as we have only 2 minutes, I'm going to give the floor to Sheira to finish this session. And I wish that we had more time to keep this discussion, but I know that we have to finish on time. So Sheira, it's all yours.
Silvana, we do have questions from the room, but I will try to address them since we've been told by the organizers that we need to vacate the room on time at 11:45 here. But and there's great interest here. He insists that he wants to say 2 words. Please, quickly.
Hello, dear panelists, here, dear participants. I have a very short question. I'm from Uzbekistan. My name is Akram. How Global Data Barometer can help to improve data ecosystem in a country? Short explanation. For example, we work with the Open Data Inventory team, and we improved a lot the problems in open data. We can build a very good ecosystem, open data ecosystem. We work with World Bank on statistical capacity, and we improved statistical capacity and statistical system a lot. But how can we work with you? Thank you.
Yes, and I promised them that this team is coming to Washington for some discussions on open data. And I promised them that you will make a detailed presentation in one of those sessions and go over some of the technical assistance and some of the other elements of what you offer, GDB. But I just wanted to sort of say that this was really a rich discussion. We didn't even get to the details of the GDB. And Silvana wanted to organize the session more to hear from the users of the data and also contributions that we've heard from OGP, from the open contracting, from the land administration, from the fiscal transparency sector. Really important discussions linked to the World Data Forum, because what this initiative does is really brings what we call data closer to decision making, to policy, and making it useful and usable. So in that sense, there's a lot to be learned, and I'm really glad to hear from Fernando, of course, from Silvana, that we're going to have another rounds of GDB, and we're going to be gathering for workshops and discussions, and we will share information if you're interested to participate in some of those going forward. So I wanted to end it by again thanking you all, and thanking Francesca and Fernando at the beginning, and thanking Silvana and her amazing panel. And good luck to you all for the round 2 of GDB, and count on us to help with any way we can. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.